The stagecoach rattled to a stop in front of the dusty general store in Quartz Hill, California. And Delilah Durant knew immediately that something was wrong by the way the man waiting on the platform stared at her through the window with his lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. It was May of 1882, and Delilah had traveled nearly 2,000 miles from Philadelphia to meet her intended husband, a mine supervisor named Gerald Hutchins, who had written her the most beautiful letters over the past 6 months. Letters filled with poetry and promises of a good life together in the California desert, where gold and silver still flowed from the mountains, and a hard-working man could make something of himself. She had answered his advertisement with some trepidation, knowing that her figure was fuller than what most men seemed to prefer. But his letters had never mentioned anything about appearances. He had written about wanting a woman with a kind heart, a quick mind, and the courage to build a life in the untamed West. Now, as the driver opened the door and helped her down, Gerald Hutchins took one long look at her rounded hips, her full bosom straining against the buttons of her traveling dress, and the softness of her face, and his expression turned to stone. "You are not what I expected," he said flatly, not even offering his hand in greeting. Delilah felt her face flush hot, partly from the desert sun beating down on the wide main street of Quartz Hill, partly from humiliation. Around them, other townspeople had gathered to witness the arrival of the mail-order bride, as such events were always notable in small frontier towns. She could feel their eyes on her, hear the whispers already beginning. "I wrote to you honestly about myself, Mr. Hutchins," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "If you will recall, I mentioned that I was not a delicate woman. Mentioning that you are sturdy is not the same as—" He paused, his gaze sweeping over her again with obvious distaste. "This. I cannot marry a woman who looks as though she has been eating bonbons in a parlor instead of working for her keep." The unfairness of it struck her like a physical blow. Delilah had worked since she was 14 years old, first in her family's bakery and then as a seamstress when her parents died of influenza. She had strong hands and a stronger back, and she had never been afraid of hard work. But she had also been cursed, or so the matchmakers in Philadelphia had told her, with a body that men found too abundant too much. "I have my return ticket money," she said quietly, though it was a lie. She had spent nearly everything she had on the journey west, believing she was coming to a new life. "I will trouble you no further." "See that you do not," Gerald said, and then he simply turned and walked away, leaving her standing in the street with her 2 battered carpetbags at her feet and nowhere to go. The crowd began to disperse, some people looking sympathetic, others merely entertained by the drama. Delilah fought back the tears that threatened to spill down her cheeks. She would not cry in front of these strangers. She would not give anyone the satisfaction. "That was about the cruelest thing I have seen in a month of Sundays," a deep voice said from behind her. Delilah turned to find a tall man leaning against the post of the general store's covered walkway. He was perhaps 30 years old, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of whiskey in firelight. He wore dusty boots, well-worn denim pants, and a shirt that had been blue once but was now faded to nearly gray. A battered hat sat low on his head, shading his face, and there was a revolver holstered at his hip. But it was his expression that caught her attention, a mixture of anger at what he had just witnessed and something else, something almost like wonder. "Life is often cruel," Delilah said, trying to sound pragmatic rather than devastated. "I should have known better than to trust in fairy tales." "A woman traveling 2,000 miles on the promise of a better life is not a fairy tale," the cowboy said, pushing away from the post and walking toward her. That takes more courage than most men I know possess. And a man who cannot see past the surface to the quality underneath is not worth a woman's tears. You seem very certain of my quality, sir, when you know nothing about me. I know you held your head high when that fool insulted you in front of half the town. I know you did not collapse into hysterics or beg him to reconsider. And I know that Gerald Hutchins is the biggest idiot in San Bernardino County, which is saying something, because we have got quite a few idiots around these parts. Despite herself, Delilah felt a small smile tug at her lips. That is kind of you to say, Mr. Pierce, he said, removing his hat and holding it against his chest in a gesture that was oddly old-fashioned and courtly. Pierce Ashford. I run a cattle ranch about 5 miles north of town. Not the biggest spread, but it is mine, and I work it honest. Delilah Durant, she replied, offering her hand. His grip was warm and calloused and strong, and he held her hand a moment longer than strictly necessary before releasing it. Well, Miss Durant, I could not help but overhear that you might be in need of somewhere to stay while you figure out your next move. As it happens, the boarding house here in town is run by Martha Hendricks, and she is the finest woman you will ever meet. Let me help you with your bags and make an introduction. I cannot afford a boarding house, Delilah admitted, hating that she had to voice such a shameful truth. I spent almost everything I had on the journey here. Pierce's jaw tightened. Then I will pay for your room until you can find work. There is always need for another set of hands in a town like this. Maybe the dress shop or the restaurant, or even helping Martha at the boarding house itself. I cannot accept charity from a stranger, Mr. Ashford. It is not charity. It is common human decency, which seems to be in short supply today. He picked up both of her carpet bags before she could protest. Besides, I am not exactly a stranger anymore. We have been properly introduced, which makes us acquaintances at the very least. Now come on before this sun bakes us both into leather. Delilah found herself following him down the wooden sidewalk, past the saloon and the assayer's office, and a small restaurant with a hand-painted sign that read Rosie's. The boarding house was at the end of the street, a 2-story structure that looked considerably more welcoming than the rest of the rough frontier town. Flowers grew in boxes beneath the windows, somehow thriving despite the desert heat, and white curtains fluttered in the breeze. Pierce knocked on the door, and a moment later it swung open to reveal a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her face was lined but kind, and she broke into a warm smile when she saw Pierce. Pierce Ashford, you are supposed to be out on the range with your cattle, not loitering in town, she said, though her tone was teasing. Had to pick up supplies, Pierce said. And it is a good thing I did, because I found this lady in need of assistance. Martha Hendricks, may I present Miss Delilah Durant. She has just arrived from Philadelphia and finds herself in unfortunate circumstances through no fault of her own. Martha's sharp eyes took in the situation immediately. You were the bride for Gerald Hutchins, were you not? I saw the commotion from my window. She shook her head in disgust. That man has always been a fool, but I did not think even he would stoop so low. Come in, dear, come in. You look about done in from your journey. Mrs. Hendricks, I must be honest with you. I do not have the money to pay for a room right now. Then we will work something out, Martha said briskly, ushering her inside. I can always use help with the cooking and cleaning, and I suspect you have skills that could prove useful. Pierce, you can set those bags at the foot of the stairs. I will get Miss Durant settled in the small room at the back. It is not much, but it is clean and quiet. Pierce set down the carpetbags as instructed, then turned to Delilah. I need to finish my business in town and then head back to the ranch, but I will stop by tomorrow to see how you are getting on. If you need anything, you tell Martha, and she will find a way to get word to me." "Why are you being so kind to me?" Delilah asked, genuinely puzzled. In her experience, men were not kind without expecting something in return. Pierce put his hat back on, adjusting it carefully. "Because Gerald Hutchins called you imperfect, and I happen to think imperfect is just another word for real. A curvy woman with strength in her eyes and fire in her spine." "That sounds perfect for a man like me, Miss Durant. Not that I am proposing marriage or anything improper," he added quickly, a faint blush coloring his tanned cheeks. "I just mean that you should not let one fool's opinion make you think less of yourself." Then he tipped his hat to both women and strode out the door, leaving Delilah staring after him with her heart doing strange things in her chest. Martha chuckled. "That Pierce Ashford is one of the good ones, salt of the earth, as my dear departed husband used to say. Now come along. Let me show you to your room, and then we can have some tea and discuss how we are going to get you back on your feet." The room was small, as Martha had promised, but it had a real bed with clean sheets, a washstand with a pitcher of water, and a window that looked out over the scrubby hills beyond the town. Delilah sat on the edge of the bed and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of what had happened. She had been rejected, humiliated in front of strangers, and left without prospects in a town where she knew no one. But she had also met Pierce Ashford, a cowboy who had looked at her with appreciation rather than disgust, who had called her perfect without even knowing her. It was probably just kindness, she told herself firmly. He felt sorry for her, nothing more. A man like that, strong and capable and clearly respected in the community, would have no shortage of women interested in him. Why would he look twice at a mail-order bride who had been cast aside? Still, as she washed the dust of travel from her face and hands, she could not help but replay his words in her mind. Perfect for a man like me. What did that mean? And why did the memory of his whiskey-colored eyes make her skin feel warm? Martha called her down for tea an hour later, and they sat at the kitchen table while Martha explained the situation in Quartz Hill. The town had grown up around the silver mines in the nearby mountains, and while the big strikes had mostly played out, there was still enough ore coming out of the ground to keep the town alive. Most of the men worked in the mines or ran businesses that supported the miners. Pierce Ashford was unusual in that he raised cattle, supplying beef to the town and the mining camps scattered throughout the region. "He is well liked," Martha said. "Honest in his dealings, fair with his ranch hands, and he does not drink away his earnings at the saloon like so many do. His parents came out here during the gold rush in '49, settled on that land when everyone else was too busy looking for nuggets to think about ranching. They both passed about 5 years ago, within months of each other, and Pierce has been running the place on his own ever since." "Has he never married?" Delilah asked, trying to sound casual. Martha gave her a knowing look. "There have been women interested, certainly, but Pierce is particular. He wants a partner, not a decoration. He wants someone who can handle the hard life of a ranch wife, who will not complain about the isolation or the work. And he wants someone real, as he put it to me once. He said he had no use for a woman who was all corset and no substance." Delilah felt that strange warmth again. "I see." "I am not saying he is looking to court you, mind," Martha added gently. "But I saw the way he looked at you, dear, and it was not the look of a man who feels only pity. It was the look of a man who has just seen something he did not know he was missing." Over the next few days, Delilah settled into a routine at the boarding house. She helped Martha with the cooking, the cleaning, the laundry, and the endless tasks that came with running a place that housed 6 permanent residents and occasional travelers. The work was hard but satisfying, and Martha was excellent company, full of stories about the early days of Quartz Hill and the colorful characters who had passed through over the years. Pierce came by on the third day, riding into town on a handsome bay horse and tying up in front of the boarding house just as Delilah was hanging laundry in the side yard. She saw him before he saw her, and she took a moment to simply watch him. He moved with an easy confidence, the kind that came from a man comfortable in his own skin. When he finally spotted her, his whole face lit up with a smile that made her stomach flutter. "Miss Durant," he said, walking over to the fence that separated the yard from the street. "You are looking well. How are you settling in?" "Very well, thank you. Mrs. Hendricks has been wonderfully kind and the work here suits me." "I am glad to hear it." He hesitated, then said, "I was wondering if you might like to take a ride out to my ranch on Sunday." "Martha could come along as a chaperone, of course. I thought you might enjoy seeing a bit of the countryside, and I make a decent Sunday dinner if I do say so myself." Delilah's hand stilled on the sheet she was hanging. "You want me to visit your ranch? Only if you would like to. No pressure." "I just thought, well, you have had a rough time of it, and sometimes getting out of town can be good for the spirit. The ranch is pretty this time of year, with the wildflowers blooming in the hills, and I have a good herd of cattle that I am fairly proud of." He was talking a bit too fast, she realized, almost nervous. It was endearing. "I would like that very much," she said softly. "Thank you for the invitation." His smile widened. "Excellent. I will come by Sunday morning around 9 if that suits you." Sunday dawned clear and hot, as most days seemed to in this part of California. Delilah dressed in her best day dress, a soft blue cotton that she had made herself, and tried not to think about how much this felt like a courtship. Pierce arrived precisely at 9, driving a wagon rather than riding his horse, and Martha climbed up onto the bench seat beside him while Delilah sat in the back, watching the town fall away behind them. The landscape was stark but beautiful in its own way, all golden hills dotted with scrub brush and the occasional twisted oak tree. In the distance, the mountains rose purple and hazy in the morning light. Pierce pointed out landmarks as they went, telling stories about the land and the people who had tried and failed or tried and succeeded to make a life here. The ranch appeared gradually, first as a fence line, then as distant shapes that resolved into buildings as they drew closer. There was a low barn, a corral with horses, another corral with cattle, and a modest house built of wood with a covered porch running along the front. It was not grand, but it looked solid and well-maintained, the kind of place built to last. "Welcome to the Ashford Ranch," Pierce said, helping first Martha and then Delilah down from the wagon. "It is not much, but it is home." "It is lovely," Delilah said honestly. There was something appealing about the simplicity of it, the way everything had a clear purpose. No frills, no pretension, just honest work and honest living. Pierce showed them around, introducing them to his 2 ranch hands, a grizzled older man named Cal and a young fellow named Tommy who could not have been more than 19. Both men were polite, tipping their hats and welcoming the ladies with shy smiles. Pierce showed them the barn, where a mother cat was nursing a litter of kittens in a pile of hay, and the chicken coop, where fat hens scratched and pecked at the ground. He showed them the vegetable garden that he admitted he was not very good at maintaining, and the small bunkhouse where Cal and Tommy slept. Then he brought them into the main house, and Delilah felt her breath catch. It was simple but spotlessly clean, with handmade furniture and windows that let in streams of golden sunlight. There were books on a shelf by the fireplace, and a rocking chair that looked hand-carved, and photographs of what must have been his parents on the mantel. "My mother made the curtains," Pierce said, following her gaze, "and my father built most of the furniture. I have tried to keep everything the way they would have wanted it." "They would be proud of you," Delilah said quietly. "Anyone can see how well you care for this place." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them, an understanding or a recognition. "Let me get dinner started," he said finally, his voice a bit rough. "I promised you a decent meal and I aim to deliver." To Delilah's surprise, Pierce was an excellent cook. He made roasted chicken with potatoes and carrots from his garden, and fresh bread that he admitted Martha had taught him to bake. They ate on the porch, with the sound of the wind in the grass and the distant lowing of cattle, and it was one of the most peaceful meals Delilah could remember having in years. "You have built a good life here," Martha said to Pierce, echoing Delilah's own thoughts. "Your parents would indeed be proud." "Thank you, Martha. That means a great deal coming from you." He turned to Delilah. "What do you think, Miss Durant? Could you see yourself being happy in a place like this? Not that I am asking you to stay," he added quickly. "I am just curious about your opinion. City girl like you, this must seem very remote." "I am not really a city girl," Delilah said. "I mean, yes, I lived in Philadelphia, but I always felt like I was in the wrong place. Too noisy, too crowded, too many people with their noses in the air thinking they were better than everyone else. This," she gestured at the landscape spreading out before them, "this feels more honest somehow, more real." "Real," Pierce repeated, and that smile played at the corners of his mouth again. "I like that word." They talked for hours about everything and nothing. Pierce asked about her life in Philadelphia, and she told him about working in her family's bakery, the smell of fresh bread in the mornings, and the satisfaction of creating something with her own hands. She told him about losing her parents and trying to make ends meet as a seamstress, and eventually deciding that answering an advertisement for a mail-order bride was better than slowly starving in a city that had no use for her. Pierce told her about growing up on the ranch, learning to ride before he could properly walk, helping his father with the cattle and his mother with the endless chores that came with frontier life. He told her about the hard years when drought killed half their herd, and the good years when the calves were strong and the market prices were fair. He told her about his dreams of expanding the ranch, maybe buying the adjacent property if old Jedediah Miller ever decided to sell, and breeding horses in addition to cattle. Martha watched them both with a satisfied expression, occasionally interjecting with a story of her own but mostly content to let the two younger people talk. As the afternoon shadows grew long, Pierce drove them back to town. When he helped Delilah down from the wagon in front of the boarding house, his hands lingered on her waist for just a moment, and she felt the warmth of his touch even through the layers of her dress and petticoats. "Thank you for coming today," he said. "It meant a lot to me, having you see the ranch, having you understand what I am trying to build here." "Thank you for inviting me," she replied. "It was a wonderful day. Perhaps we could do it again sometime, maybe without Martha as a chaperone if that would not be too forward. I could teach you to ride if you would like, or we could just take a walk in the hills, look at the wildflowers." Delilah felt her heart begin to race. "I would like that very much, Mr. Ashford." "Pierce," he said. "Please call me Pierce." "Pierce," she repeated, and the name felt right on her tongue. "And you should call me Delilah." "Delilah," he said, testing it out, and the way he said her name made her feel like she was something precious. "I will come by next Sunday then. And probably 1 or 2 times during the week if I can spare the time away from the ranch. I find that I do not want to wait a full week to see you again." After he left, Martha gave Delilah a hug. "That man is smitten with you, dear. Absolutely smitten. I have known Pierce since he was a boy, and I have never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." "It is happening so fast," Delilah said, feeling almost dizzy with the rush of emotions. A week ago, I was on a stagecoach thinking I was going to marry Gerald Hutchins. Now I am thinking about Pierce Ashford and feeling things I have never felt before. When it is right, Martha said wisely. Sometimes love does not need time to develop. Sometimes it just strikes like lightning, and you either embrace it or run from it. I think you should embrace it, Delilah. That man could give you the life you deserve. Pierce came by on Tuesday evening, arriving just as Delilah was helping Martha prepare dinner for the boarding house residents. He carried a bouquet of wildflowers that he must have picked from the hills around his ranch, purple lupines and golden poppies and delicate white flowers she did not know the name of. I thought these might brighten up the place, he said, handing them to her with an almost shy expression. They are beautiful, Delilah said, burying her face in the blooms to hide the flush in her cheeks. Thank you. I also wondered if you might like to take that walk I mentioned. The sun will not set for another few hours, and there is a nice path along the creek just outside town. Very respectable. Lots of people use it. I would love to, Delilah said, already untying her apron. They walked side by side along the creek, which was little more than a trickle this time of year but still supported a line of cottonwood trees that provided welcome shade. Pierce pointed out bird nests in the branches and told her the names of the different plants growing along the bank. She told him about the dresses she used to make in Philadelphia, how she had dreamed of one day having her own shop, but could never save enough money to make it happen. You could make dresses here, Pierce said. There is certainly a need. Most women have to make do with what they can sew themselves or what comes through the general store, which is not much. I would need fabric, equipment, a place to work. The general store could order fabric. And as for a place to work, well, there is an empty building on Main Street that used to be a land office. The owner moved to San Francisco last year. I bet you could rent it for not too much once you had a bit of capital saved up. You make it sound so easy, Delilah said, laughing a little. I am not saying it would be easy, but I am saying it would be possible. You are capable and talented, Delilah. You should not let one setback define your future. They stopped walking, and Pierce turned to face her fully. I want to be honest with you about something. When I saw you step off that stagecoach and watched Gerald Hutchins treat you like you were less than worthy, I felt something I have never felt before. Anger, yes, at his cruelty, but also recognition. Like I had been waiting for you without knowing I was waiting. Delilah's breath caught in her throat. Pierce, I know it is too soon to speak of serious things. We have only known each other a week, but I do not believe in wasting time or hiding the truth. I am interested in courting you, Delilah Durant. Properly, respectably, with the aim of marriage if we find we suit each other as well as I think we will. And I want you to know that your figure, your appearance, all the things that Gerald Hutchins found lacking, I find them perfect. You are built like a woman who can handle hard work and hard times. You are strong and real and beautiful, and I would be honored if you would consider allowing me to court you. Tears pricked at Delilah's eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I would like that very much. Pierce let out a breath he seemed to have been holding. Thank God, he said, and then he took her hand, threading his rough fingers through her smaller ones. I was afraid you might think I was crazy, moving so fast. If you are crazy, then so am I, Delilah said. Because I have been thinking about you constantly since the moment we met. You made me feel seen, Pierce. Not judged or found wanting, but truly seen for who I am. They stood there by the creek as the sun sank lower in the sky, holding hands and talking about their hopes and dreams and fears. Pierce told her that he sometimes worried he was not enough, that he was just a rancher with dirt under his fingernails and no fancy education. Delilah told him that she had always felt like she was too much, too big, too loud, too opinionated for the world she had been born into. "You are not too much," Pierce said firmly. "You are exactly right. And I am not too little. We are both just what we need to be, Delilah. Together, I think we could be something extraordinary." The courtship that followed was the happiest time of Delilah's life. Pierce came to town 3 or 4 times a week, and on Sundays he would take her out to the ranch where she gradually learned the rhythms of his life. He taught her to ride, first on an old gentle mare named Buttercup, and she proved to be a natural horsewoman, unafraid of the animals and quick to learn. He showed her how to check the cattle for signs of illness, how to mend a fence, how to read the weather in the shape of the clouds and the behavior of the animals. In turn, she taught him things he had not known he needed. She showed him how to make his house feel more like a home, sewing new curtains and tablecloths, planting flowers around the porch. She cooked meals that reminded him of his mother's cooking but with her own special touches, and she listened when he talked about his worries and his plans, offering perspective and support. The town watched their courtship with approval. Everyone liked Pierce, and most people had been appalled by Gerald Hutchins's treatment of Delilah. It satisfied a certain collective sense of justice to see her finding happiness with a better man. Gerald himself stayed away from both of them, though Delilah heard through Martha that he had sent away for another mail-order bride, this one specifically requested to be slender and delicate. Delilah found she could not even muster any anger toward him anymore. His rejection had led her to Pierce, and she would not change that for anything in the world. 2 months into their courtship, Pierce proposed. It was not a dramatic proposal, no bended knee in a public place. Instead, it happened on the porch of his ranch house on a Sunday evening as they sat in the rocking chairs his father had made, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. "Delilah," Pierce said quietly, "I think you know where my heart is. I think you have known for a while now. But I want to make it official. I want to marry you, build a life with you, raise children with you if we are blessed with them. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. I want to share the burdens and the joys, the hard times and the good times. Will you marry me?" Delilah turned to look at him, this good man who had seen her worth when another had seen only flaws. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you, Pierce Ashford. Nothing would make me happier." He pulled her into his arms then, and they shared their first real kiss, tender and sweet and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "I do not have a fancy ring yet," Pierce admitted, "but I will get you one, something pretty, something worthy of you." "I do not need a fancy ring," Delilah said. "A simple band would be perfect. Everything about us is real and honest and simple in the best way. I would not want to change that." They set the wedding for early October, when the worst of the summer heat would be past, and Pierce would have sold his cattle at the autumn market, giving them a bit of financial cushion to start their married life. Delilah worked extra hours at the boarding house to save money for a wedding dress, and in her spare time, she began sewing the most beautiful gown she had ever created. It was made of ivory silk that Pierce had special ordered from San Francisco, with lace at the collar and cuffs that she had tatted herself. The dress was designed to fit her curves perfectly, neither hiding nor exaggerating them, but simply allowing her to look like the most beautiful version of herself. When she tried it on for Martha a week before the wedding, the older woman had tears in her eyes. "You look like an angel," Martha said. "Pierce is going to forget how to breathe when he sees you walking down that aisle." The wedding was held at the small church in Quartz Hill, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Delilah had no family to invite, but Martha stood as her matron of honor, and Cal and Tommy from the ranch served as Pierce's best men. The minister was a traveling preacher who came through once a month, a kind man with a booming voice who spoke about love and partnership and the sacred bond of marriage. When Delilah walked down the aisle, she kept her eyes on Pierce waiting for her at the altar. He was dressed in a new suit, his hair neatly combed, his boots polished to a shine. But it was his expression that took her breath away. He looked at her like she was the answer to every prayer he had ever prayed, like she was the most precious thing in his world. They spoke their vows in clear, firm voices, promising to love and honor and cherish each other for all the days of their lives. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Pierce pulled her into his arms and kissed her soundly, to the cheers and applause of everyone gathered. The reception was held at the boarding house, with Martha and several other women from town providing a feast of roasted meats, fresh bread, vegetables from their gardens, and pies and cakes for dessert. There was fiddle music and dancing, and Delilah danced with her new husband until her feet ached and her face hurt from smiling. As the evening drew to a close, Pierce lifted her into the wagon for the ride out to the ranch, which was now her home. The townspeople threw rice and called out well wishes, and Delilah felt a swell of gratitude for this community that had welcomed her when she had nowhere else to go. The ranch house looked different when they arrived, and Delilah realized that Pierce had decorated it with more wildflowers, and candles glowed in the windows. He carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in what was now their parlor. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ashford," he said softly. "I like the sound of that," she replied. "Mrs. Ashford, it suits me." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, two people coming together with love and respect and a deep desire to please each other. Pierce was patient and gentle, and Delilah felt cherished in a way she had never experienced before. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed that had been his and was now theirs, talking quietly about their hopes for the future. "I want to give you a good life," Pierce said, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her arm. "I want you to be happy here, Delilah. If you are not, if you need something different, you have to tell me." "I am happy," she assured him. "Happier than I ever thought possible." "You have given me everything I needed, Pierce. A home, a purpose, and love, so much love." "You have given me the same," he said, pulling her closer. "I was just existing before you came along, working, sleeping, working again, but now I feel alive. You make me want to be better, do better, build something that lasts." Life on the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. Delilah learned quickly, taking to the work with enthusiasm. She proved to be excellent with the horses, and Pierce often joked that they liked her better than they liked him. She kept the house spotless and welcoming, cooked meals that kept the ranch hands happy and well-fed. And in her spare time, she began taking in sewing work from women in town, building a reputation for quality craftsmanship. The seasons turned, summer giving way to fall and then the cold of winter. It did not snow much in Quartz Hill, but the nights grew chilly and the winds were sharp. Delilah and Pierce spent those long winter evenings by the fireplace, reading aloud to each other or simply sitting close, enjoying the warmth and the comfort of companionship. In early spring, Delilah began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited another few weeks to be certain before telling Pierce, wanting to be sure before raising his hopes. But when she finally sat him down one evening in April and told him they were going to have a baby, his reaction exceeded all her expectations. He let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop before she got dizzy. Then he set her down carefully, his hands gentle on her waist, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "A baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" she asked, though his reaction had made the answer clear. "Happy, Delilah, I am beyond happy. I am thrilled. I am terrified. I am every emotion at once. We are going to be parents." "We are," she agreed, placing her hand over her still flat stomach. "In about 6 months, if my calculations are correct. Late October, probably." Pierce insisted on her resting more, taking on extra chores himself despite her protests that she was pregnant, not ill. He worried constantly, asking Martha for advice on what Delilah should eat, what she should avoid, how they could ensure the baby would be healthy and strong. Martha found his concern endearing and assured him that Delilah came from sturdy stock and would weather pregnancy just fine. As Delilah's belly grew, Pierce became even more attentive. He rubbed her feet when they swelled, brought her cool water when the summer heat became oppressive, and talked to the baby every night, his hand on her rounded stomach, telling their child about the ranch and the life they would have together. "I am going to teach you to ride," he said one evening when Delilah was 7 months along, "and to rope cattle, and to be honest and fair and kind, and your mother is going to teach you so many things too. She is the strongest, bravest, most wonderful woman in the world, and you are so lucky to have her." Delilah felt tears slip down her cheeks, as they so often did these days. "You are going to be a wonderful father." "I am going to try," Pierce said. "God knows I am going to try." The baby came on a chilly night in late October, just as Delilah had predicted. Martha came out to the ranch to assist with the birth, as there was no doctor in Quartz Hill, and she had helped deliver half the babies in town over the years. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Pierce, pacing outside the bedroom door, thought he might lose his mind with worry. But finally, just as dawn was breaking over the hills, he heard the angry wail of a newborn baby, and moments later Martha opened the door with a huge smile on her face. "You have a son," she said. "A big, healthy boy with a set of lungs on him. Come meet your son, Pierce." Pierce entered the room on shaky legs to find Delilah propped up against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a red-faced baby wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up when he approached, and the love in her eyes nearly brought him to his knees. "Meet your son," she said softly. "I thought we might name him Peter after your father." Pierce sat on the edge of the bed, his eyes on the tiny face of his son. "Peter," he repeated, reaching out a tentative finger to touch the baby's impossibly small hand. The infant's fingers immediately wrapped around his finger, gripping with surprising strength, and Pierce felt something shift in his chest, a fierce protective love unlike anything he had ever experienced. "He is perfect," Pierce said, his voice thick. "You are both perfect. Thank you, Delilah." "Thank you for this gift. We made him together," Delilah said, smiling tiredly. "He is ours, Pierce, our family." Peter Ashford proved to be a healthy, happy baby. He had his father's golden brown eyes and his mother's dark hair, and he was adored by everyone who met him. Cal and Tommy competed for the privilege of holding him when they came in from working on the range, and Martha visited often, bringing baby clothes she had knitted and advice on everything from teething to colic. Life with a newborn was exhausting, but Pierce and Delilah managed by working as a team. Pierce took the night feedings when he could, walking the floor with Peter when the baby fussed, singing old lullabies his mother had sung to him. Delilah marveled at how natural fatherhood seemed to come to him, how gentle and patient he was with their son. As Peter grew from a tiny infant into a chubby toddler, the ranch prospered. Pierce made good decisions with the cattle, expanding the herd slowly and sustainably. Delilah's sewing business grew as well, and she eventually saved enough to rent that empty building on Main Street that Pierce had mentioned years before. She opened her dress shop when Peter was 2 years old, hiring a young woman from town to help mind the store and take orders while she did the actual sewing at home, where she could still be close to her son. When Peter was 3, Delilah became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy felt easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect, or perhaps because she was not worrying about proving herself to anyone anymore. She was secure in her place in the world, confident in her marriage and her abilities as a mother. Their second child, a daughter they named Penelope after Pierce's mother, was born on a warm day in May. She was smaller than Peter had been, with delicate features and her mother's full lips. Where Peter was boisterous and bold, Penelope was observant and thoughtful, content to watch the world from her mother's arms. "Our little family is complete," Pierce said, holding Penelope while Peter played at their feet. "2 healthy children, a good home, work we love." What more could anyone ask for? "Nothing," Delilah agreed, leaning against his shoulder. "We have everything that matters." The years passed in a blur of hard work and simple joys. Peter learned to ride before he turned 5, fearless on a pony that Pierce had trained especially for him. Penelope showed an early talent for drawing, sketching the horses and cattle with surprising accuracy for such a young child. The ranch grew, and Pierce eventually did buy that adjacent property when old Jedediah Miller passed away, expanding the Ashford holdings significantly. Delilah's dress shop became one of the most successful businesses in Quartz Hill. Women came from miles around for her creations, knowing they would get something beautiful and well-made. She hired 2 more seamstresses as the work increased, and she trained them in her techniques, taking pride in teaching others the skills she had learned in her youth. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Pierce planned a surprise for Delilah. He arranged for Martha to watch the children overnight, and he took his wife on a trip to the coast, a 2-day journey by train to see the Pacific Ocean. Delilah had never seen the ocean before, and when she stood on the beach with the salt wind in her hair and the waves crashing at her feet, she cried at the beauty of it. "Thank you," she said to Pierce, turning to embrace him. "Thank you for always showing me wonders, for making my life so full. Thank you for taking a chance on a rough cowboy who did not know enough to be scared when he saw the woman of his dreams standing in the street with nowhere to go," Pierce replied. "Thank you for building this life with me." They walked along the beach hand in hand, talking about the past decade, about the challenges they had faced, the losses and the victories, the way they had learned each other's rhythms and needs. They talked about their children, their pride in Peter's growing confidence and skill with the horses, their delight in Penelope's gentle spirit and artistic talent. "Do you ever think about that day I arrived in Quartz Hill?" Delilah asked. "About how different things might have been if Gerald Hutchins had not rejected me?" "I think about it sometimes," Pierce admitted. "And I thank God every time that he was fool enough to let you go. Because you were never meant to be his, Delilah. You were always meant to be mine, and I was always meant to be yours. We just had to find our way to each other." "Fate," Delilah said softly. "Love," Pierce corrected. "Fate brought you to Quartz Hill, but love kept you there. Love made you stay. Love made us brave enough to take a chance on each other. And love is what has sustained us through everything since." They spent that night in a small hotel overlooking the ocean, falling asleep to the sound of the waves, wrapped in each other's arms. When they returned home, Peter and Penelope greeted them with hugs and stories about their time with Martha, and the house felt more like home than ever. Life continued its steady, satisfying pace. Peter grew into a young man who was the image of his father, tall and strong and honest to his core. He took over more and more of the ranch work, showing a natural talent for managing cattle and horses. Penelope continued to develop her artistic skills, and when she turned 14, Delilah arranged for her to study with a painter who lived in Los Angeles, traveling there once a month for lessons. When Pierce turned 50 and Delilah was 48, they celebrated by throwing a party at the ranch that included most of Quartz Hill and all the neighboring ranchers. It was a testament to the life they had built, the respect they had earned, and the love they had shared for 20 years. Peter, now 20 years old, stood to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught me by example that the best marriages are built on respect, partnership, and choosing each other every single day. You too are my model for what love should be, and I hope someday to find what you have found together." Penelope added her own toast. "To my mother, who showed me that a woman can be strong and soft at the same time. And to my father, who taught me that the measure of a man is how he treats those he loves. I am so proud to be your daughter." Delilah and Pierce stood together, surrounded by friends and family, and looked at each other with eyes that held 2 decades of shared history. Every joy, every sorrow, every triumph, and every challenge had been faced together, and they had emerged stronger for it. "I love you," Pierce said, the words as true now as they had been when he first spoke them. "I love you too," Delilah replied. "Thank you for seeing me when no one else would. Thank you for loving all of me, exactly as I am." "You are perfect," Pierce said, repeating the words he had spoken so long ago. "Perfect for a man like me." As the party continued around them, they slipped away for a moment of privacy, walking out to the porch where they had shared so many evenings over the years. The sun was setting over the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, and the ranch spread out before them, a testament to everything they had built together. "You have any regrets?" Delilah asked, a question that came from curiosity rather than insecurity. "Not a single one," Pierce said firmly. "Every choice I made, every path I took led me to you. How could I regret that? Even the hard times, the drought that killed part of the herd, the winter when Penelope was so sick we thought we might lose her. Even those," Pierce said. "Because we faced them together, and we came through on the other side. The hard times taught us we were strong enough to weather anything. They made the good times sweeter." Delilah leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the absolute reliability that had been her anchor for 20 years. "I came to Quartz Hill expecting one life and found something so much better. I found you." "We found each other," Pierce corrected gently. "And we built something worth having. A family, a home, a love that has lasted. That is more than most people ever get, Delilah. We are the lucky ones." Inside the house, they could hear music starting up again, the sound of fiddles and laughter. But they stayed on the porch a few minutes longer, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky, holding hands the way they had that first evening by the creek when everything was new and uncertain and full of promise. The years that followed brought their own changes and challenges. Peter married a sweet girl named Sarah from a neighboring ranch, and within a year, Delilah and Pierce became grandparents to twin boys who were as wild and energetic as Peter had been. Penelope's artistic talent was recognized by a gallery owner from San Francisco, and she began selling her paintings of Western landscapes and ranch life, becoming somewhat famous in artistic circles. The ranch continued to prosper under the combined efforts of Pierce and Peter, and they expanded into horse breeding as Pierce had once dreamed. The Ashford Ranch became known throughout California for producing quality cattle and horses, and buyers came from as far as Nevada and Arizona to purchase stock. Delilah eventually sold her dress shop, deciding that she would rather spend her time with her grandchildren and pursuing her own interests. She took up gardening seriously, transforming the area around the ranch house into an oasis of flowers and vegetables that seemed miraculous in the harsh desert climate. She wrote letters to women back east who were considering becoming mail-order brides, offering advice and encouragement, telling them that while the West was hard, it was also full of opportunities for women willing to take chances. Martha Hendricks passed away peacefully in her sleep when she was 75, and Delilah grieved deeply for the woman who had given her a place to stay when she had nowhere to go, who had become a second mother to her. The whole town turned out for the funeral, a testament to how beloved Martha had been. On what would have been their 30th wedding anniversary, Pierce surprised Delilah with a trip to San Francisco. They stayed in a fine hotel, ate at elegant restaurants, and went to the theater, something Delilah had not done since she left Philadelphia all those years ago. But as wonderful as the city was, they were both relieved to return to the ranch, to the wide open spaces and the honest simplicity of their life. "I am glad we had the experience," Delilah said as they rode back to the ranch in their wagon, "but I'm even gladder to be going home." "That is because you are a ranch woman through and through now," Pierce said with a grin. "I do not think you could ever go back to city life, even if you wanted to." "I could not," Delilah agreed. "Everything I love is here. You, our children, our grandchildren, this land. This is where I belong." As they grew older, Pierce and Delilah began to slow down, though neither ever truly stopped working. Pierce spent more time supervising than doing physical labor, content to let Peter handle the day-to-day running of the ranch. Delilah focused on her garden and her grandchildren, teaching the girls to sew and the boys to appreciate growing things. They took to spending their evenings on the porch, rocking in the chairs Pierce's father had made, watching the sun set over the hills they had come to know so intimately. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, the kind of silence that comes from two people who know each other so well that words are not always necessary. "I have been thinking," Pierce said one evening when they were both in their early 60s, "about how lucky we have been, not just in finding each other, but in having the time we have had. 32 years of marriage, and I love you more now than I did when we started. How is that possible?" Delilah asked, though she felt the same way. "Because I know you better now. I know your strength, your resilience, your kindness. I have watched you face every challenge with grace and courage. I have seen you as a wife, a mother, a grandmother, a businesswoman, a friend. Every role you have taken on, you have excelled at. How could I not love you more?" Delilah felt tears prick her eyes, though she smiled. "You are going to make an old woman cry, Pierce Ashford. You are not old," he protested. "You are seasoned, like good leather or fine whiskey." She laughed at that, the sound carrying across the quiet evening. "I think that is the strangest compliment you have ever given me, and that is saying something." They sat in companionable silence for a while longer, and then Pierce said, "I want you to know that if I had to do it all over again, I would not change a single thing. Not one moment, not one choice. Every step led me here to this life with you, and that is the greatest gift I could have received." "I feel the same way," Delilah said softly. "Even the painful parts, even the rejections and the hardships, they all had meaning because they brought me to you. I was rejected for being curvy, for not fitting someone else's idea of what a woman should be, but you looked at me and saw exactly what you wanted. You saw me." "I saw you," Pierce confirmed. "And I loved what I saw. I still do, Delilah, every day." As the stars came out and the night air grew cool, they went inside to the house they had shared for more than 3 decades. The walls held memories in every corner, The floors remembered the footsteps of children learning to walk. The windows had framed countless sunrises and sunsets. It was more than a structure of wood and nails. It was the physical manifestation of their love, their partnership, their life together. Peter and Sarah eventually built their own house on the far side of the property, wanting to give the elder Ashfords their privacy while still being close enough to help with the ranch. Penelope married a writer she met in San Francisco and divided her time between the city and the ranch, always returning for major family gatherings and holidays. The grandchildren grew, and then came great-grandchildren, and Delilah and Pierce watched their family tree expand with pride and joy. Every new baby was a miracle. Every wedding was a celebration. Every milestone was marked and remembered. When Pierce turned 70, the family threw him a grand birthday party. Children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled the ranch house and spilled out into the yard, and there was food and music and laughter. Peter made a speech about what his father had taught him about integrity and hard work. Penelope presented him with a painting she had done of the ranch in all seasons, 4 panels showing the land in spring green, summer gold, autumn brown, and winter gray. But the best gift came from Delilah, who stood before her husband in front of their entire family and said, "70 years you have walked this earth, and I have been blessed to share the last 43 of them with you. You have been my rock, my partner, my best friend, and the great love of my life. Every day with you has been a gift, and I thank God that Gerald Hutchins was foolish enough to reject me, because his loss was the greatest gain of my life." There was not a dry eye in the house, and Pierce pulled his wife into his arms, holding her close while their family applauded and cheered. The years continued their inevitable march forward. Pierce and Delilah both moved more slowly, their hair turned fully white, their hands grew stiff with arthritis. But their love remained constant, perhaps deeper and richer for all the years it had had to grow and develop. They took to sitting on the porch even more frequently, wrapped in blankets when the weather was cool, watching the life of the ranch continue around them. Cal had long since retired and passed away, and Tommy had taken over as foreman before retiring himself. Now it was Peter's children who ran the day-to-day operations, and they did so with the same integrity and care that had always characterized the Ashford Ranch. "We built something that lasts," Pierce said one evening, his voice a bit weaker than it had once been but still full of conviction. "Something that will outlive us and continue for generations." "We did," Delilah agreed, "and we built it together with love and hard work and faith in each other. No regrets. Not a single one," she said, echoing his words from years before. "My life has been everything I could have hoped for and more." They sat quietly, holding hands as they watched the sun set over the California hills one more time. The sky turned orange and pink and purple, the colors deepening and then fading as the first stars appeared. It was a sight they had seen thousands of times, but it never grew old, never lost its power to move them. "I love you, Delilah," Pierce said, the words as true and necessary as breathing. "I love you too, Pierce," she replied. "Today, tomorrow, and always." They remained on the porch as the night grew dark and cool, wrapped in blankets and each other's presence, grateful for every moment they had been given, every day they had shared. The ranch was quiet except for the distant sound of cattle and the whisper of wind through the grass. Inside the house, lights glowed warmly, a beacon of home. This was their life, built from nothing but hope and hard work and a chance encounter in a dusty frontier town. It was a life forged from rejection and redeemed by love. A life that proved that sometimes the things we think are our greatest flaws are actually our greatest strengths, If only we can find someone who sees us clearly and loves us completely. Pierce and Delilah Ashford lived many more years together, both of them making it past 80, a rare accomplishment for their time and place. They saw their great-grandchildren grow into young adults, saw the ranch continue to prosper, saw the town of Quartz Hill evolve from a rough mining settlement into a real community with schools and churches and civic pride. When Pierce finally passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 83, Delilah mourned him deeply, but without regret. They had been granted more time together than many couples ever received, and they had made the most of every moment. She continued living at the ranch, surrounded by family, tending her garden and holding her great-great-grandchildren, telling them stories about the old days and the grandfather they would not remember. Delilah lived another 2 years after Pierce's death, and on the evening before she passed, surrounded by her children and grandchildren in the house she and Pierce had made a home, she looked around at all the faces gathered near her bed and smiled. "I had a good life," she said clearly. "I was rejected once, a long time ago, by a man who thought I was not enough. But then I met a cowboy who said I was perfect, and he taught me to believe it. We built all of this together." She gestured weakly at the room, but they all understood she meant more than just the house. She meant the family, the legacy, the love that had sustained them all. "Remember that your worth is not determined by those who reject you, but by those who see your value and cherish it. Pierce saw mine and I saw his, and we created something beautiful." She passed quietly that night, slipping away as peacefully as one could hope. The family buried her next to Pierce on a hill overlooking the ranch, where the wildflowers grew thick in spring and the view stretched for miles. Their graves were marked with simple headstones that bore their names, their dates, and a single line that Peter had chosen. Together they built a life of love. The ranch continued for generations, always in the Ashford family, always run with integrity and care. The story of Pierce and Delilah became part of family lore, told and retold to each new generation. The tale of how a mail-order bride was rejected for being curvy, and how a cowboy looked at her and said, "Then you are perfect for a man like me," became a reminder that true love sees beyond the surface to the soul beneath. Their great-great-grandchildren would visit those graves on the hill and place wildflowers there, the same kinds of flowers Pierce had once picked for Delilah when they were young and just beginning to fall in love. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind whispered through the grass, people swore they could feel the presence of that enduring love, still watching over the land they had cherished, still together even in death as they had been in life. It was a love story that began with rejection and bloomed into something magnificent. It was a testament to the power of seeing someone truly, of valuing substance over superficiality, of building a life together through hard work and dedication and unwavering commitment. Pierce and Delilah Ashford had found each other when both were lost, and together they had created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. Their story reminded everyone who heard it that true love is not about perfection, but about finding someone who loves your imperfections, who sees your curves and your softness and your strength and says without hesitation, "You are perfect for me." It reminded people that the right person will see your worth even when others have been blind to it, and that sometimes the greatest loves begin with the simplest acts of kindness. The Ashford Ranch still stood generations later, a thriving operation that supplied cattle and horses to markets across the West. The family that ran it still told the story of their ancestors, keeping alive the memory of two people who had dared to believe in love at first sight, who had built a life of meaning and purpose, and who had proved that sometimes being rejected by the wrong person is simply fate's way of saving you for the right one. And in Quartz Hill, California, now a much larger town than it had been in 1882, there was a small museum dedicated to local history. Among the displays of mining equipment and photographs of the early settlers, there was a special exhibit about Pierce and Delilah Ashford. It included letters they had written to each other, photographs from various stages of their lives, and the story of how they met, fell in love, and built an empire together from nothing but determination and devotion. Visitors to the museum often paused at that exhibit, reading the story with smiles and sometimes tears. It gave people hope, especially women who had been told they were too much or not enough, that somewhere out there was someone who would look at them and see perfection. It reminded men that true strength lies not in demanding a partner meet arbitrary standards, but in recognizing and honoring the strength in the person standing before them. The story of Pierce and Delilah Ashford was more than just a romance. It was a lesson in courage, in taking chances, in looking beyond the surface to see the heart of a person. It was a reminder that love, real love, is built on respect and partnership, and the daily choice to cherish the person you have chosen to spend your life with. Their legacy lived on not just in the land they had worked and the family they had raised, but in the example they had set. They had shown that it was possible to build something lasting, something beautiful, something worth having, even when you started with nothing but hope and faith in each other. They had proved that the best marriages are not between perfect people, but between imperfect people who love each other perfectly. And so the story ended, as all good stories must, with love triumphant and a family thriving, and the knowledge that two people who had found each other against all odds had lived a life worth living. Pierce and Delilah Ashford were gone, but they were not forgotten. Their love story continued to inspire, to encourage, to remind people that sometimes the greatest loves begin with someone looking at you and seeing exactly what they needed all along. In the end, that was what Pierce had done for Delilah all those years ago in the dusty street of a frontier town. He had looked at her, rejected and humiliated and lost, and he had seen his future. He had seen strength and beauty and worth, and he had been brave enough to claim it. And Delilah had been brave enough to trust him, to take a chance on a cowboy who offered her kindness when she expected only more rejection. Together, they had built a love for the ages, a partnership that lasted through decades of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. They had raised children and grandchildren, and seen the fruits of their labor flourish in ways they could never have imagined when they first stood on that porch and talked about their dreams. Their story was complete, a circle closed, a life well lived. And in the hearts of those who knew their story or who were descended from them, Pierce and Delilah Ashford lived on, an eternal reminder that true love is not about meeting someone's expectations, but about finding someone who loves you exactly as you are, curves and all, and says with absolute certainty, "You are perfect for me." That was their legacy, and it was a legacy worth leaving. A legacy of love, acceptance, partnership, and the unshakable belief that everyone deserves to be loved for exactly who they are, not for who someone thinks they should be. Pierce and Delilah had lived that truth, and in doing so, they had created something that would never truly die. Their love, their story, their legacy would continue as long as there were people who believed in the power of seeing truly, loving deeply, and building a life together one day, one choice, one moment at a time. And that, in the end, was the greatest happy ending anyone could hope for.